Well, I wasn't really expecting to have a part 2, but here we are. Hi, Sarah here. Welcome back. So this is a sequel to a video that I posted last week, which was also a sequel to a couple videos that I posted the weeks before. And surprisingly, I come here today with a part 2 with 10 more reasons why I shouldn't buy certain decks. Still no hashtag or short title for this, but of course anyone is welcome to do a VR or even just respond in the comments with your own reasons for decks that you won't buy. Real quick, I want to shout out Dark Fae Tarot, also on YouTube. I just watched their video on deck collecting, literally just today, a week or two after filming my initial videos. Their video was posted pretty recently, like 2 months ago. And I really enjoyed hearing their thoughts as well on errors just made in collecting decks. So if you liked my video, I feel like you should also check out Dark Fae Tarot's video here. I'll put the link in the description. Before we get to the reasons, I want to address something that Benabel1 wrote in her post, which I so appreciate the discussion and the disagreements and the contrasts in our opinions and our experiences. She wrote her own comment about how she's more lenient with the decks that she brings in, and she does break her own guidelines all the time. I think that's a fantastic point that I want to address. Everyone does indeed have their own deck deal breakers or reasons why they will or will not bring in a deck. I recognize that Benabel Wen is an author and an academic. She definitely derives a lot of joy from studying tarot decks, and she writes things. Like, that's one of the big differences between her and me. I am not an author. I don't desire to be an author. I'm not a critical reviewer. I don't desire to be a critical reviewer. I don't desire to read tarot for others professionally. So basically, I think that's just a good example of how, we have to discern where we are different from other people. Because it can be so easy to be like, well, I really want to be like Benabel and I want to do all the things that she does and have all the same decks that she does. But does that work for me? Does that work for my lifestyle? Does that work for the way that I read and do tarot? So instead of wanting to become like them and copy other people exactly, this list just helps me remind me of the things that work for me. And to address her second point of how she says that she breaks her own guidelines all the time, I think that's a fantastic point. Like, there is no shaming here. And of course, shaming ourselves for the things that we don't like just usually doesn't work for us to change these things that we don't like or habits that we want to curb. This is just a way of looking at these purchasing patterns and these selling patterns neutrally and with compassion and grace. And one thing that I've been saying is that I wish that there were more tarot deck libraries that existed in the world, or just places where we can go and look at tarot decks and actually flip through the cards, maybe practice doing readings with them, but we're not actually committed to bringing them home and keeping them forever and spending money on buying them in the first place. I'm sure that if we had tarot deck libraries more accessible to all of us, then it would be a lot easier for us to go look at decks for free and even borrow them for a few weeks, but then we can return them and we don't have to actually buy them. But because we don't have tarot decks, it's understandable that we'd be curious, Curiosity is not a crime. We buy these things, we try them out, and then we sell them because we were curious and we wanted to try them out. Please don't feel shame if you wanted to try out a thing and it ended up not working out for you and you sold it. Now you know, we all learn lessons somehow. Let's go on to the next reasons why I won't buy a deck. I wanted to stay away from the obvious reasons. Like, for example, I wouldn't buy a deck that doesn't feature any racial diversity, that features only young people, is black and white. Those reasons just feel like a given to me because I've never been tempted by those types of decks. So for these reasons that I'm listing, I wanted to list more reasons for decks where I've actually been tempted. So these are things that have actually tempted me in the past. So the first type of deck that I won't buy is astrology-themed decks. This kind of pains me to say because I have wanted astrology decks for so long. My fantasy self would definitely study astrology and get really into the nitty-gritty of the zodiac signs and, the stars and the planets and all the associations. But I have found that in this entire time that I've been doing tarot, I have not shown much interest in astrology. I've literally downloaded a certain astrology video on YouTube that's 3 hours long, and I've been intending to listen to it for the past many years, but I've never listened to it, not even once, never even played it a little bit. So I think that goes to show that when it comes to astrology, I'm just not actually interested in it as much as I thought I would be. I did buy this one altar cloth that is astrology themed. This is from the same creator of the Gentle Thrills Tarot. So this is an astrology cloth, and I intended for this to kind of be a study material for me too. How many times have I used it for astrology reasons? 0. I mean, I've hardly used it as a cloth as well. Yeah. This is reminding me of what I mentioned in my last video about how I won't buy decks that I will need to study or decks that my fantasy self will work with, I realistically likely will not actually ever study astrology, at least in the near future. So me, you probably don't need to buy an astrology deck. Go listen to some free resources on YouTube first. The next type of deck that I won't buy is a fandom deck. Most fandom decks have not tempted me because I am not super into a lot of decks like Star Trek, Next Generation or Disney villains or any Disney decks really. But I have found that it's still good for me to like anti-haul fandom decks overall because I just find myself pretty picky with how characters and scenes are depicted in fandom decks. I had the Moon Crystal Tarot, which is a Sailor Moon themed deck, and I ended up selling it because even though I love the characters and I did kind of like the way that they were drawn, I just found myself being very nitpicky with like, why is this character on this card? Maybe they should be on a different card. Like, how does this character apply? I don't really understand that artist's vision. I also briefly had the Little Wizard's Tarot, which is based off of Harry Potter, and sort of similar thing. I was like just trying really hard to understand where the artist is coming from and understand why these characters were matched up to the certain cards. I also forgot which characters were on some of the cards. The guidebook did not mention which character was on which card. Granted, the Little Wizard's Tarot did not have a guidebook, but the Moon Crystal Tarot did. Either way, the characters on the cards are not named or referenced in the book. Overall, I just feel like fandom decks are not something that I want to read with because I feel too much pressure to want to have or name the character exactly so that I can recognize the character and apply the character story into a reading. I think that's just too much pressure to place like on a tarot reading. Here's another example of a fandom deck that I own. It's the Afro Avatar Tarot. This is out of print right now. I don't know if the creator is ever going to reprint it. This is an Avatar themed deck, Avatar The Last Airbender. Some of the cards feature just original characters. I feel like even though I really, really like Avatar, and I feel like this deck is done really well in depicting certain scenes or characters, I overall don't use this for readings. I don't know if it's a case of I'm working through other decks right now, but I feel like it's just been a while since I've pulled this out for readings, and I don't really feel more called to it than other decks. So I don't know, maybe the fact that it's a fandom deck specifically makes it not want to pull it out for like general readings. Either way, me, you don't need to buy fandom decks. But what I would like to do instead is to find other decks that do fill that niche or that vibe that I'm looking for. So even though I don't have a Sailor Moon themed deck anymore, if I'm feeling the Sailor Moon vibes, I can probably find another deck in my collection that can replace and substitute and give me those Sailor Moon vibes. Like, what is it exactly that I'm looking for from a Sailor Moon vibe deck? Is it like the magical vibe, young girl, young child vibe, the elemental vibe? I'm sure I could find other decks in my collection that could substitute for those. So even if I don't have fandom decks, I can try to be a little bit more creative in what other decks I can use instead. The next type of deck that I won't buy is a Rider-Waite-Smith clone. And to clarify, I think some people get confused between Rider-Waite-Smith based decks and Rider-Waite-Smith clone decks. In my opinion, Rider-Waite-Smith based means the deck might follow Rider-Waite-Smith meanings. It might illustrate the same kind of meanings that Rider-Waite-Smith deck has, whereas a Rider-Waite-Smith clone is literally the exact same as a Rider-Waite-Smith deck, except maybe the figures have been redrawn or the art has been redrawn, but it's still the exact same as the Rider-Waite-Smith deck. The Moon Crystal Tarot is a good example of this. Literally, most of the cards were just the Rider-Waite-Smith cards redrawn with Sailor Moon characters and in the artist's own style. I'm pretty bored and tired of the Rider-Waite-Smith imagery. If I want to read with the Rider-Waite-Smith deck, I'm just going to read with the basic Rider-Waite. If I'm buying a new deck, I don't want the same as a Rider-Waite-Smith just redrawn, and I definitely don't want to pay more than $20 for that type of deck. I want something new, so no more Rider-Waite-Smith clones for me. The next type of deck I won't buy is a deck where the court cards are not scenic or expressive, especially the kings and queens. I definitely have some beef with court cards, and I definitely do think that some decks don't put enough effort into the court cards as much as I wish they did. One of my pet peeves in a tarot deck is when they're not really depicting anything in the card, but in the guidebook, they'll mention this card means this and this and this. The person in the card means this and this. And I'm like, why don't you show me in the card instead of just telling me what it's supposed to mean in the guidebook? I'm buying a tarot deck to have these scenes and characters depicted to me visually. I want to be able to read the images on the card. I don't want you to depict a king sitting in their throne, sitting down, doing nothing. And then you tell me in the deck guidebook, this king is so magnificent and doing all these things and so smart. It's like, can you show me, not just tell me? I'm going to pull an example. Unfortunately, it is the Midnight City Tarot. I do like this deck though. I just did a tarot and practice video with this, but some of the court cards in here are really frustrating for me, and they're not as scenic or expressive as I feel like they could be. So one example is the Queen of Swords here. Here we see someone holding their sword clearly, and they're sitting at a park. But I don't really understand anything about what this Queen of Swords is supposed to embody. I don't know what traits they're demonstrating. I don't know what actions, what their personality is even like. And in the guidebook, it will tell me like the Queen of Swords is about setting boundaries and maybe speaking your truth. And I'm like, how is that depicted here? You've just depicted someone just sitting down with a sword. I don't really know what I'm supposed to be getting here. Another example is the Queen of Wands. I see the Queen of Wands as someone who is the life of the party. And here I can see kind of a little bit of symbolism, like there's fireworks kind of symbolizing the radiance and I don't know, the magnificence of this person's personality. In the guidebook, they write that the phone is buzzing with texts, but like I don't see what's on the phone. I don't see anything in this card that represents the queen being like very radiant. I just see them sitting down and honestly taking a break from the party. King of Wands is another gripe I have with this deck. Like, again, I just don't see much showing here. I feel like the guidebook would tell me how to interpret the King of Wands, but I want to be shown what this King of Wands means. Not to nitpick the Midnight City Tarot, but this happens in a lot of tarot decks. And typically when I look at a new deck, I do want to see the court cards and I want to see some sort of action or symbolism or behavior in the court cards. I feel like I have enough decks already where the court cards are more on that side where they're just kind of sitting down or not really in action. So when it comes to buying new decks, like I do want to make sure that they bring something different. And one of the different things that I hope for is that they can show the court cards in a new, unique way. That's just scenic or expressive, you know, using their body language and the environment in the cards. The next type of deck that I won't buy is a deck that I think is going to pair well specifically with just one other deck. A lot of people on YouTube will talk about deck pairings, and a lot of people, at least on YouTube as far as I've seen, they will use multiple decks in a reading. People like to pair decks together, people like to create little deck families, or just find different ways to, you know, harmonize their decks and use multiple decks in one reading. That's just not something that comes naturally to me or that I really find any value in. I have been tempted to buy a deck before because someone says like, oh, this deck would pair really well with like, let's say the Midnight City Tarot. And I'm tempted and I'm like, oh, maybe I want to buy that deck so I can pair it when I do the Midnight City Tarot readings as well. But the fact is, I usually only do like one deck per reading. Maybe I will pull in another Oracle deck, but there's no rhyme or reason to how I pair decks together. Pairing decks together, either visually or thematically, just is not something that I'm interested in. And also, if I'm going to pair a deck with only like one other deck, I don't think that deck is worth having in my collection. I want my decks to be versatile enough to be able to be used for any situation or along with any decks should I choose to pair them with any decks. But just buying a deck just because someone else said, or I think it might pair well with just one other deck, that's just not a good enough reason for me to justify buying this deck. I fell into this trap with the Zillich Tarot in a Tin. Someone on Facebook had posted that this deck pairs really well with the Reclaim Oracle, which is a deck that I really love. And so I bought the Zillich Tarot in a Tin, and I never read with it. I also didn't do my research on it because that was a Thoth style deck, so I ended up getting that like a while after I bought it. But yeah, if I'm tempted to buy a deck that will pair specifically with just one other deck, I should not buy it. The next type of deck that I won't buy is mostly any Oracle deck, just most Oracle decks. I do have a small collection of Oracle decks, and even though I posted a video like a month or two back of Oracle decks in my collection, I've already like given a good amount of them away because the fact is I just don't use Oracle decks as much or as meaningfully as I do tarot. Even though theoretically I could use Oracle decks in the same way that I do tarot, like I could still lay them out in a spread, I could still do daily draws with them. I just don't feel like using any Oracle decks that way. I already have a good amount of Oracle decks that I feel like work in my favor and that I know how to work with, and I've just built a good practice that works for me with these Oracle decks. So I feel like there's not really any room for me to bring any more Oracle decks in because I just have the ones that I like already. Oracle decks with keywords, for example, they just don't really work for me because I just prefer to read tarot words over Oracle deck keywords. Phrases or affirmations, I don't really need because I already have certain Oracle decks with phrases and affirmations, and like how many affirmation decks does one really need? I think the only exception for an Oracle deck I might be tempted by is a deck with a certain theme or a use. But again, I do have the ones that I like and use already, and like I said in my other video, there's not any other practice that I'm looking to incorporate or do right now that I need to buy a deck for. So yeah, just no more Oracle decks for me. The next type of deck I won't buy is tarot decks with keywords or phrases. And this one definitely bums me out because when I see keywords or even phrases on a deck or keywords or poems in a guidebook, I get really excited because part of me is like, wow, that's so cool. A certain keyword matching every single card, or a certain poem or little art thingy matching every single card. I would love to buy this deck so that I can read the keywords or the phrases or the little sayings or poems on each card. But the fact is, I think those things are more like a novelty for me rather than something that I would actually enjoy and use and appreciate long term. I've had a couple of decks with keywords on them. For example, the 5 Cent Tarot and the Zillich Tarot. The Gil Tarot also had keywords. But I find that when I do readings, I don't really care for keywords at all. I think that keywords are helpful for a beginner. Even when I do readings for other people, I don't really like referencing keywords. I like just letting the image, the tarot knowledge, like speak to me. And I feel like keywords can really box me in and make me feel like I have to refer to only that keyword. Like what happens if I draw like the 10 of Swords in a reading and oppression isn't the word that comes to mind. Oppression is not the word that I want to work with. And there's a couple of decks on my wish list right now that do have phrases, but I am going to hold off on them for a while. I think those types of decks are just things that I might appreciate looking at in a walkthrough and maybe living vicariously through other people on YouTube. But for myself, I don't think I would actually use them that much. So yeah, no keywords, no phrases on my decks for me. Just the image is fine. The next type of deck that I won't buy is a deck that I think I'm only going to use for videos or for reading for others. And I've been tempted by this a few times. I've definitely bought a deck or two where I thought, oh, I'm totally going to use this for pick-a-pile readings on YouTube. I have not done a pick-a-pile reading since the beginning of this year or even last year. I was tempted by a certain deck because I thought I was going to do relationship readings and love readings for other people. And I don't do relationship readings for other people specifically. The most time that I spend doing tarot is doing tarot for myself. So it only makes sense to me to only buy decks that would work for reading for myself. I'm not on camera 24/7, and I definitely don't make a living doing tarot on camera. So it doesn't make sense for me to buy decks that I would only use on camera or for like showing off on camera. And likewise, I don't do readings for others professionally, so it doesn't make sense for me to buy decks that I would only want to use for reading for others, but not for myself. So yeah, if I think I'm only going to use a deck for videos or for reading for others, but not myself, I'm probably going to reconsider. The next type of deck I won't buy is decks that are about to go out of print or be unavailable, but I haven't really been interested in them for weeks or months. And I'm going to pull an example from my last video. I'm sure you can guess which one it is. It is the Weaver Tarot. Like I mentioned, I really wasn't interested in this deck after I rehomed another edition the first time. It was only after the creators mentioned that they were going to retire these decks that I put it on my wish list and I was eyeing it. I ended up buying this because they had a cyber sale. And you know what's funny is I feel like after they had their new decks in, there were still some of these decks on their website. So it wasn't going out of print as soon as I thought it was going to be. So yeah, this is an example of a deck that I bought that was about to go out of print, but I wasn't really interested in it for weeks or months, and I have not read with this. So this is an example of a deck that was about to go out of print, but I wasn't interested in it for months. And after I bought it, how many times have I used it? 0. So yeah, I feel like if I wasn't interested in it before, I probably shouldn't be getting it now. I also just don't want to get into the nitty-gritty of trying to price an out-of-print deck reasonably. Yeah, I just don't want any part of that out-of-print reselling market. The last type of deck that I won't buy is a deck with too similar of a function to one that I already own. So, for example, I got the Walking Meditation Tarot through the artist's Kickstarter campaign last year, I believe. I was initially enamored by the deck because it features photographs from the artist's walks. And the whole theme of the deck is just being out in nature and appreciating nature and being able to meditate out in nature. And so, intrigued, I got the deck. And as soon as I got the deck in, I just knew that it wasn't the deck for me. And when I realized that I have other nature-y decks in my collection, I was like facepalming because I didn't need to buy another nature-y themed deck when I already have a nature-y themed deck. And moreover, I also don't really use this deck. The nature-y themed deck I'm mentioning is the Naturescapes Tarot by Queen of Wands. So this one also features a lot of photographs. Granted, they're like stock photos, not photos taken by the creator, but you know, still a collection of photos and very naturey and very pretty and gorgeous and outdoorsy. But yeah, I already have this deck, so I didn't need to get the Walking Meditation as well. So that was, you know, $60 that I didn't really need to spend. And this reason applies to other types of decks as well, like, again, animal decks or modern decks. I already have animal decks that I like and use. I already have modern decks that I like and use. I already have oracle decks that I like and use. So if I already have at least 1 or 2 things that I like and use, it doesn't really make sense for me to buy more things in case I'm going to use those as well, because I don't know, I just rather pare down and have like less that work for me instead of like a lot of different options that I don't really work with. So those are 10 more reasons for decks I won't buy, for reasons why I'm being picky about buying new decks for my collection. But to reiterate what I said at the beginning of the video, curiosity is not a crime. So even if you have your own guidelines for decks that you don't want to buy or do want to buy, and you end up breaking those guidelines anyway, it's okay because we're all curious creatures and we all just want to try things out. Until we have more free tarot libraries, it only makes sense that we might just want to buy decks to try them out. Then maybe we end up selling them or giving them away. And, that's just life sometimes. And I want to repeat something I said in my last video as well, which is if I'm tempted by a Kickstarter because I want to buy a deck, nowadays what I like to do is I like to just throw in a few bucks anyway and support the artist monetarily, but I don't want to commit to the physical reward. So again, instead of choosing the deck that gets me a physical reward, I'll just throw in like 10, 15, 20 bucks just to support the artist just because. I still get the anticipation feeling because I get to see the project being fulfilled. I get to see all the updates that the artist is doing. I get to like and comment and support the artist that way. But I don't have another physical deck that I bring in that I probably may or may not work with in the next year. I have a lot of decks right now that I do want to work through, and I'm just always trying to practice slowing down a little bit more so that I can work with the things that I have and make use of them. Like, there was a point when I was excited to buy certain decks that I have in my collection right now. I want to make sure that I slow down in my purchases and bringing in new things so that I can focus on the things that I have and, enjoy that excitement that I once had for the deck and why I wanted to bring it in the first place. Again, I have no hashtag or catchy title for this, just decks I'm not going to buy, maybe a general anti-haul of decks, not really sure. But if you're so called to comment or make a VR to this, I would absolutely love to see it. I hope you enjoyed the sunset look today. Wanted to do opposite colors from the blue eyeshadow look I had last time. And with that, I'm off to find more video content ideas for my channel. So that's all for today. Thanks for watching. Bye!